Chapter 11. Dakota. Dakota watched Ashton as he slept. His body pale and strong, his shoulders broad and small waist. Her body heated and ready to be taken by him, but instead left empty to think about what could have been. She mumbled words before moving close to his butt, her groin and hips thrust forward as she felt a need flow between her legs and settle on her clit. She nipped his shoulder, placed her arm around his waist, then pressed her lips on his back, but he didn't budge. "This is too complicated," she said, whispering into his ear. "I don't know if this is what I want anymore. I don't think I want to be with anyone after you've rejected me. I might stay single for the rest of my life." Her words fell into the air, and Ashton didn't hear a word. Dakota thought he would turn and ask her why, but he didn't. She wanted to look into his gorgeous face and his heated eyes. When her wandering hand moved down to his cock, she felt his hard length. Even in his sleep, his body is ready, but why did he reject my advances? She thought. Ashton had fallen asleep the minute he turned over. Dakota pulled away from him, not knowing the reason for his exhaustion. She got to her feet quickly, taking a moment to stare at the beautiful creature sleeping as if dead. But he was dead, and this was his time to sleep. Dakota didn't know that Ashton had been up with Elizabeth in that crypt-like safe in Morgan's home on the island for 2 days. And for more than 2 days, Dakota had been resisting Ronan. For 2 days, Ashton made Elizabeth serve him, and she had been happy to do so. For 2 days she endured his fury, wrath, the brutality of his punishments, and the floggings on her bare ass, and then the hard, stimulating fuck. Elizabeth enjoyed his anger and cried out for more. The debasements she endured, sucking his hard cock as he explained that it belonged to Dakota and he would never fuck her again. Sleeping at his feet with a leather collar, begging for him to fuck her in her cunt, which he never did, and wouldn't again, he had promised. These were Elizabeth's punishments, to have him locked in the room with him and satisfy himself without him lying on her body or placing himself inside her. Ashton hadn't thought about Elizabeth until that day. When he walked away from her in Italy, he never wanted to see her again, and especially since he had met Dakota. Before, he had felt something for her, but that had long faded when he found her at the Vampires Club, where she had become without a doubt Morgan's submissive. She couldn't serve two masters. Him and Morgan both. He knew it and Morgan knew it, and that's why Morgan locked her up with Ashton. Like that, Morgan thought she could soften him up and make him serve Morgan and bring with him Dakota. Dakota watched the beautiful specimen sleeping, and she saw no need to wait until he woke. Hurrying over to the bell after dressing, she placed her finger and tapped the bell. The silent buzzer at the frame of the door called for the servant Walker to let her out of Ashton's bedchamber. He showed up and led her through a dark corridor and into a light-filled apartment. "Can you take me home?" Dakota asked. Sitting down, she glanced around looking for a phone. "What time is it?" she mumbled, not expecting an answer. "I'm afraid I can't. Mr. Mieres said that I wasn't to let you out of my sight during the day when he sleeps. It's 7:15 and breakfast is ordered. I hope you like what I've chosen." She rose from her chair facing the terrace and crossed her arms as she sat down at the table. Breakfast was the last thing on her mind. The first thing was getting out of there. Who does he think he is? He can't hold me hostage? I have things to do. I haven't worn my own clothes in a month, she thought. And I have to search for Paige and Thomas. Closing her eyes, the smell of cooked bacon and buttered toast smelled too good to pass up. "Would you like someone to serve you?" Walker asked. He knew Dakota wasn't used to servants, and he knew the answer when he asked the question. "No, thank you. I think I can manage." Finally, she gave in to her hunger and cast aside her pride and strode to the buffet table in the large dining room. The food looked delicious. Eggs cooked in several styles. Fried eggs, scrambled eggs, poached eggs with broiled ham on English muffins covered with hollandaise sauce, eggs Benedict and loaves of bread of all kind, and steaks, bacon, fruit. The menu was endless. Dakota just stood looking at the choices. She didn't know what to do, but her empty stomach made a decision for her. She ate until she had become full. Just looking at the food made her think about others who weren't as fortunate. Walker glanced at her from the doorframe. He knew what she had been thinking. After the servants have eaten and taking some home to their families, Dr. Mieres donates all the cooked and uncooked food to a food kitchen or pantry throughout Seattle. This goes on every day? I've been with him over 30 years, and every morning before sunrise the cooks will prepare the food, and someone will bring freshly cooked food, bread and fruit around to different places. If they miss one kitchen today, they will visit it the next day, but we don't miss any deliveries. Dakota glanced around. Walker knew another one of her questions and answered it. The food you see here is for his staff of people, but he has a company structured to feed the needy and hungry every day. When Walker busied himself with boxing up rows of endless bread and fruit, Dakota sat and clicked on the television. To her surprise, Thomas was speaking fast in his accent, with a reporter interviewing him about the state of immigration. Thomas glared at her with wide dark eyes and said, "I don't want to talk about politics. Vampires are running around among us and werewolves too." The newscaster didn't expect that answer, and she tried to move away from Thomas, but he followed behind her. "They're coming for all of us." Thomas pointed at the person standing next to him. "She could be a vampire. I know because I've seen them. I know what they can do." Thomas stood shouting about vampires and werewolves for 10 minutes. Finally, the cameraman and the newswoman cut him off in mid-speech. Dakota turned off the television and rushed to get a phone when Walker stepped into the kitchen. She found several sitting in a basket on a counter. She looked around to see where Walker had gone to in the large house. She keyed in Thomas's telephone number. "Pick up." "Pick up?" she whispered. Then she decided to text him. "Thomas, come and get me. I'm still alive. Dakota." Dakota sent the address. A few minutes later, Thomas sent a message back. "Okay." Breathing hard, Dakota dashed around looking in closets when she found a coat Ashton had Walker buy for her. She discovered a backpack as well and threw in a few things and the phone. Dakota didn't know who it belonged to, but it was probably Walker's. She had to decide whether to leave him a note and tell him that she would send the phone to him, but she decided against it. Chapter 12. Dakota. "What the fuck, Dakota? I thought you were dead or worse." Thomas glared at her as she ran out of Ashton's apartment building, tripping on the curb, then frantically pulling at the locked car door. "Open the door," she whispered loud as she looked left and then right for security cameras, and finding them in every corner of the building. "Sorry, get in," Thomas said as he unlocked the doors. "The way things are, you can never be too careful. Especially with those friends of yours. They're vampires, and they don't travel during the day." "But what about that tall, hairy creature lurking around the island?" "A werewolf, I would guess," Thomas said after Dakota jumped into the front seat. Thomas took off, leaving tire marks on the driveway as he headed out to the highway in the dizzying rain. The windshield wipers suddenly made a thumping sound which startled Dakota and Thomas. Thomas settled back and concentrated on the road and the drivers. "What could be worse?" she asked, referring to his earlier statement. Thomas's head turned to Dakota after he checked to make sure there was no obstruction in his way. "Being fucked by a werewolf," he shouted over the music playing on his jump drive. Dakota had to catch her breath. It was unbelievable coming from Thomas's mouth. Reaching over, she turned the music low. "How did you become so urban? And what do you know about a werewolf? I thought you were gone. I thought the vampires had you as their slave or something." "Nope. It's me. I guess it's from hanging with you that I've picked up all kinds of habits, and we do use the F word in our country. The English brought that word to India. We stole it. Thomas waggled his thick eyebrows. I think it fits me. Don't you? Thomas said, raising his head with pride, before veering off on another subject before answering her question. Elliot carried me to the ocean before that large hairy werewolf came looking for me. I thought he wanted to kill me and Elliot, so we hid. That large hairy werewolf came to protect you. He would have killed Elliot. Probably. I'm glad he didn't find the both of you. Dakota turned and looked out. She hadn't seen Seattle lately when it wasn't raining. She felt damp and cold. The skyline in the distance and the rain breaking against the concrete buildings reminded her of the cave where Ronan brought her. Elliot is too nervous to be a vampire. I feel sorry for him. He helped me into the skiff at his own peril. That's why I'm able to be here now. Whatever you need to rescue him, I'm willing to do. Dakota turned back to Thomas, trying to forget Ronan. I don't think we can do anything to help Elliot, except put him out of his misery. Are you willing to kill Elliot because he's a vampire now? He didn't act like one, Thomas said, his eyes staring forward with his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His lips were quivering as if he wanted to cry, but didn't think that was a manly thing to do. You would do something like that, would you? I'm going to be a doctor. I have to look at this in a rational, logical manner. Nothing about this shit is rational. Vampires, werewolves. All this is unusual and illogical. Even you saying you're going to kill vampires is crazy. How are we going to find them? I can't find my socks in the dryer. How can you put one pair of socks in the dryer and only one comes out? It's not the same thing, Thomas. Yes, it is. By my logic, if I can't find a sock I know is there, then how are we to find vampires and be able to kill them? Think about it. Did you check the filter? The sock could be stuck inside a hole. Similarly, if we check the logical places, we'll find where the vampires are hiding, and then we can systematically kill them. And I suppose you know where the logical places are. Not yet, but I'm working on it. My father's journal may have some clues, Dakota said to Thomas. Thomas's face turned to Dakota. She turned away, staring out, looking ahead with a grave expression. Her teeth clenched, and a furrowed brow gave the appearance on her youthful features of a face lined from worry. Her eyes never blinked for the longest. Thomas turned to keep his eyes on the traffic. He had never seen that look on her face before, and he knew she was serious about killing vampires. What about Elliot? What about Ashton? You know Ashton, your vampire lover. Dakota didn't like when Thomas talked casually about Ashton. He was everything to her, and she would die before she saw anything happen to him. Shouldn't Ashton be part of your kill the vampire rant? Ashton is more than a friend, and he doesn't pose a threat to me or you or the world. I love Elliot too, and I wish I could help him. But I don't think he can be helped. Dakota placed her hand to her mouth as if to hold back a sigh. Me too, Thomas said, slowing down to take the car off the ramp from the freeway. Where are you going? You've been driving forever. I hope it's to your apartment. No one knows about your apartment. We can be safe there. Thomas's dark eyes opened wide. No. We can't go there. My girlfriend visits me every Monday. Then tell her you're going to be busy. I can't tell her that. We have a date tonight. It's a full moon, and I expect to get lucky. Thomas? You sound like Ronan. Who's Ronan? Thomas said, taking his eyes off the road. The werewolf on the island. You sound like him. He seems to think that it's a good time to mate. For werewolves it is. I've heard the elders talk about how these hairy men would come from the jungle and carry off virgins. Then it's true. Yes. All countries have werewolves and vampires, but some have more than their share like this country. I thought I was leaving that nightmare behind, and here I run into it. It appears that everything I'm afraid of, I have to face. And I'm afraid of you. Me? What did I do besides save your life? My life wasn't in jeopardy until I met you, now look at me. My dick hasn't been hard in months. And when it does get hard, now you tell me you're coming to my house. I don't want you there, Dakota. You're trouble. I knew it the minute you climbed into my taxi, that you were nothing but trouble. You shouldn't be so negative, Thomas. I love you too, Dakota said as she touched Thomas's shoulder and he flinched. Tell me one positive thing that's happened to me since I've met you. Dakota searched around, and she couldn't come up with a satisfactory answer. At least not one Thomas would accept. I've been driving around, staying clear of my apartment, and trying to shake that BMW, but I can't, Thomas said to Dakota as he intermittently peered in his rearview mirror. Dakota turned around. Don't turn around, they will know that we see them. I'm going to try to lose them. This is my area. I know it well. Thomas took off, zooming down one street and then another. The BMW kept up with them. Then Dakota glanced over at the car's dashboard. You won't be able to lose them or anyone. You're almost out of gas. Fuck. Fuck. Fuck, Thomas whispered under his breath as he pounds on the steering wheel. He drove into the nearest gas station. When he came to a stop, the black BMW kept going. Maybe that was a coincidence, Thomas said, pulling up to a pump and stopping. Sitting for a second and closing his eyes to calm down, then after a moment he turned to Dakota. Do you have any money? She remembered she had left most of the money Ashton gave her on the boat she chartered, thinking they wouldn't need any. She was right. Impatient, Thomas looked in her direction, and he knew she had nothing. What are we going to do? Check your pockets. You could have something in them. These are new things. Not even my clothes. There's nothing here. Then Dakota reached for her phone. Captain Zachary, if you can bring the things I left on the boat, I will pay you handsomely for your time. Dakota sat and waited. Knowing that she had paid him more than the time he spent out on the water and took in a little fishing, it hadn't cost anything for his inconvenience. It hadn't been a waste of his time, but a windfall. Captain Zachary had been languishing and making small day trips, and not being able to pay his bills. He was about to lose his vessel until Dakota came along and paid him more than the trip was worth. More than the boat was worth on the market. But worth the world to Captain Zachary. When Dakota came along offering all that money for a few hours, she was a godsend. He reluctantly left her and her friend because of the storm and rough waters that day. He couldn't risk his livelihood, and he felt she would be okay, and she was, to his delight. As Thomas and Dakota sat in silence watching cars come and go, a man in his late 40s with dirty blonde hair longer than men his age stepped out of an old antique Ford truck. He hit on the window on the passenger side. Thomas flinched and Dakota looked up and smiled. Then she stepped out of the car. Is this what you want, Dakota? She smiled at the captain and took the satchel and inside a small bag and opened the bag and pulled out some old large $100 bills. Is that enough? She asked Captain Zachary. More than enough, he said, his eyes sparkling as Dakota handed him the money. He saluted her. If you need me for anything, you know how to get in touch with me. Text, call, or send a picture and I get to you. You've saved my life, Dakota. He grabbed her and gave her a hug with his long arms and large rough hands. If I call, you may have to save my life. I'll remember what you said. You do that. And he saluted Dakota again and climbed into his old red Ford truck. The truck's exhaust pipe gave out a loud bang and gas fumes blasted into the air when he cranked it up and took off, headed for the interstate. Now we have money. Put some gas in the car and here's something for your time. Thomas raised his hand. I don't want the money. Just enough for the gas. I'm doing this because I'm your friend. And I'm giving you this because I'm your friend. What's money worth if you can't share some of it with your friends? That was eloquent. Not original, but eloquent. In that case, I accept it, Thomas said with a broad smile and climbed out of the car, walked into the store and paid for the gas. After filling the car up, he opened the car door and sat for a few seconds. Looking at Dakota, he exhaled. Before turning on the motor, Thomas glanced over at Dakota. She stared out her window in silence. He wondered what Dakota was thinking or conjuring up next, which might put them in mortal jeopardy. With his eyes forward, he inhaled and exhaled, started the car and pulled away.